Hey there, fellow comic collectors. I'm Scott Harris King. Today I'm really excited to bring to you an interview with Jay Piscopo, the artist for our new comic, Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam, which is currently live on Kickstarter. I'll have all the links down below so you can go and check that out. This is something that's been in process for a long time, and I was really excited to be able to bring Jay on as the artist for this project. I think his art is just the perfect complement to the story that I've written here. And so, in this interview, we're going to talk about the process, how we created the comic book, why we wanted to do the project, and we'll talk about some of Jay's other works and things like that. But it's really exciting for me to bring the comic to you, and also to bring you this insight into behind the scenes how we made the comic. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoy this. Without further ado, Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam artist Jay Piscopo. So first of all, Jay Piscopo, thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you doing the art on Uncle Sam vs. Cthulhu that I'm really excited about. Of course, you're pretty well known in the comics community, specifically with the redesigning of Golden Age superhero characters, and in that space, a lot of the sort of public domain Golden Age fans follow your work. I'm just to introduce yourself to people who may not be in that space, may not be familiar with you. Just why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into comics and got into art?
Sure. Well, Scott, first of all, that's thank you for that wonderful introduction. That was very nice. And also, it's an honor to work with you and be a part of this project. And I felt really lucky that you chose me. And it was a lot of fun to work on, and we'll talk about more about it and get into the details. But yeah, I just want you to know how, thankful I am to work with you on this stuff. It's been great. So yeah, I worked on, this stuff. I worked on the Undersea Adventures of Captain Eli years ago, this stuff. And I came up with this character, the Sea Ghost. And that's where a lot of comic book people are more, I would say, the superhero freaks needed that a bit, because this is really the hero right here, even though he's in a Jack Kirby outfit. But it was basically this thing created to promote a soda company, which I helped launch. And from there, though, I had a really wide berth, so to speak, to create whatever I wanted. And at a point that I got into this third book, the reason I'm thumbing through this, I want to show you that when public domain characters right here is a bunch of characters, my own characters, and then public domain characters that were kind of redesigned and reworked. And this was around the time, right before, when this kind of exploded with fans. So I got really into it immediately, like a lot of fans did, and I think you did as well. I think with Crime Busters as well, you were early in on things, and said, well, I got some potential here because there's all this reprint material, but also there's these other, you have these established characters, and this is what, regardless of whatever they've got some great pedigrees, number one, and regardless of whatever happened to them, this is pretty much how the big companies survived, and what they were based on was the use of these kind of characters, or these stables of characters, as their research and development. So it's fascinating. Your character, we're using Uncle Sam, and DC Comics uses Uncle Sam, but we're not using it in any way that they've used him before. We're not using it in the context of freedom fighters or anything like that. You've definitely got your own feel of it, and it's definitely a growth from what the original inspiration was. You definitely create, which is, I haven't seen myself. And that's because, that's not saying much, because I don't want to see a lot of stuff, but I mean, to see him portrayed this way, as sort of Superman, and a spiritual Superman kind of thing. And, it's kind of, I'm putting my own words in here, but, it's a lot of fun to use these characters. It was a dream for me to use this Uncle Sam character based on the Lou Fine, Will Eisner, right? Is that pretty much what you're?
I think so.
So yeah, that's my background with this stuff, was that, I fell in love with it the way a lot you did and a lot of other people did. And then I started using it in my own work.
I mean, for me, the inspiration is to read the stories. You go through the stories, and
Sure.
see that what the characters were like and the spark things. Like for me, in Uncle Sam, Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam, the story we're talking about here, one of the supporting characters is Granny Gumshoe, who I've been using in Crime Busters, and that
Captivating.
is a character that, you know, when I
So
read her first appearance in National Comics 57, I was like, I love this character. I want to use this character. And I thought of all these different ways to update it. And that's what's exciting for me about
So
the,
for the audience, just quickly, and I'm sure you have graphics and people are going to say, is basically it's uh, Mary Poppins mixed with James Bond, right, or something? Can we say, or that kind of?
yeah, she's kind of like a Mary Poppins, or the Doctor. She's a lot like the Doctor, but she's got this bit of a dark sense of humor, let's say. Um, and I've talked to people who have read Granny Gumshoe in the last issue of Crime Busters that she was in, and are like, this character's great. But when they read the originals, because they've gone back to read, her appearances in National Comics in the 40s, they don't really see where from point A to point B. They don't see how I was inspired by that character to update it into this character. But that's for me is really the fun of doing
Sure.
these golden age characters in the public domain, the redesigns, is that they spark your imagination
Totally.
in new
This character
directions.
was, when you first mentioned it to me, really sparked my imagination. I think she was one of the first things they drew, and also her sidekicks, which I wish I had a little more. I gave more
Yeah,
screen to, but that's not anyone's fault. Just the way it goes with him. But they were fun to do as well, and her setups and gadgets are quite interesting. I think people are going to like that. She's got her sort of steampunk kind of world, right? That's cool.
yeah. So I mean, that was really exciting for me. Um, why don't we talk a little bit about the process of making this, because I've talked to a couple other people about this before. The way we did the book is a little bit unusual for these times because I guess fitting for doing like a sort of throwback feel in the comic, we use the Marvel method to do the comic. And I've talked to some other comic writers, and they seem universally to be shocked that I would actually do the Marvel method. But I really have always loved the Marvel method, and I really enjoyed it. It's a different, a different way to work, but it's for me, it just sparks my creativity as well. When I get the pages in, seeing the way you interpreted things, sometimes exactly what I was thinking, other times not what I was thinking, but then I'm like, oh, this is new possibilities and scripting based on the art. To me, it was very exciting, but it's not something that most people use anymore.
Well, it's great you meant, because I think, we could clarify, even though we're calling it the Marvel method, which if it's Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, that's what it came from, there's so many interpretations. Stan Lee would say, well, once you do a book about God, then he comes up with, Kirby comes up with Galactus and the Silver Surfer. That didn't happen here whatsoever, where you already had a very clear vision of your story.
Right.
You also had a very clear vision of visuals and particular points of interest that were definitely written in stone, which would not be called Marvel method, which would be called more of a script, me interpreting a script. Where I think the Marvel method happened here is it's Arlen Schumer has a thing called the auteur, one of his lectures on the auteur comics method, where he's correlating. I think this is well done, where it's the filmmaking aspect of it. So we're coming in working as filmmakers together, was my belief. And where anything that I had come in and said, well, hey, have you thought about seeing it this way, was if I was going to be working with a director who wrote his own script and hired me as a DP, or not really, I wouldn't be a DP, but as the designer of the film and storyboard artist. And I would offer this view, and if we were really shooting it, you would possibly give me 3 or 4 other views to sketch just to see what it would look like. because the budget will. I think that's how it worked. So in that give and take, the way we did it seemed to me to be much more like a filmmaking thing. And I think the final product, from what I haven't read it yet with everything, with complete text in it, but in terms of the general flow, I thought, and this is what I think I'd been telling you from the beginning, was I felt it was like a great, what if Frank Capra made a Fleischer cartoon or made a superhero cartoon, because of the human interest. We've been talking about Granny Gumshoe, and we've been talking about Uncle Sam, and which were wonderful to draw. And, that's the kind of stuff to be able to draw them out of my head as well, and not have to go overly referential, and just be able to use my own sort of out of my head style with this stuff it's fun. But the background characters, who are actually really the source of the story, the main character that we use, the GI character, and I don't want to spoil anything, but what was the human interest parts of the story really fascinated me. And then how Cthulhu was used, and sort of the Cthulhu stuff is fantastic. Maybe we can segue into that. Was that, this seems to be, it started, I think, in comics, where people started to get more of a consciousness about it, was maybe Hellboy, from a comics point of view, even though Lovecraft had been around a while. And you kind of brought in your own take on it. And to see, I think that was the thing that attracted me to this thing. I think your initial piece of art, I think you did, of a giant Uncle Sam fighting a giant Cthulhu, was like, okay, there's an 8-year-old Godzilla thing going on in me, and then there's this 57-year-old going, okay, that's the homeostasis. That's what I want to meet when I'm looking at if I'm looking at being a modern comic book fan. So yeah, it had just all these mixtures of things. But back to how we collaborated with it, was that it was just a genuine, I think, respect for what you're doing, understanding where you come from with your, you had outline. And so
Yeah.
I'd worked with Brian Augustyn in a similar way. This is the other thing I think why this worked before. I've done this method before, the so-called Marvel method before, where it's not where I come in and go, I'm taking over, you give me your script, this is how it should be done, then I throw it back to you. It's much more of like, I'm working off your script and I'm just visualizing it to maximize. And or what happens, I think we went through this too, is where how information like we know that, a page, there's only so many ideas you can get through a page. And sometimes splitting an idea up, giving it more of a easing into the idea from one page to the next, continuity issue, stuff is, again, is for filmmaking stuff, but from the point of view of, this is a static comic, but we still have, I believe, those same issues. Does one page flow into the next? 2-page spreads, all that kind of stuff. These things aren't random. It's all, everything is there, for a reason. And one of the things, I'll say one more thing, where some of that was, this is some of the leeway that I took into it, was that coloring the book, there's definitely a sort of a leitmotif going on where, especially at the end, where I could give away, but again, I'm into the mood of the story, and I'm trying to get the colors to match the mood as best as possible. And when I went back, before I had sent the pages to you, and look through the story again, I was like, we get that a little bit, because we go from several different locales to another planet. And one of my frustrations with colorization is some things tend to gray out, or, with this, we're kind of animated. We look like, I think we look kind of Fleischery, I think we have that kind of, or the Warner Brothers cartoon thing going on, or Bruce Timm maybe. But at the same time, I think there's definitely this mood, where we're moody. It's a moody book. So I think that came from collaborating. It was all there in your initial vision, and then I just came in and you just let me photograph it, let's say, and board it. So I think that's where the Marvel method came in.
Yeah, and it was, as I mentioned, it was very exciting for me. you mentioned the color. My first thought was I always love it when someone else colors things because I'm colorblind. So it's, when I'm doing my own art and I'm trying to color, it's very difficult, time consuming.
Yeah, I would say
Um,
definitely. I would see that it's going to add an extra layer
yeah,
challenge.
but what I found is that not to sort of digress a little bit, but for me personally, being colorblind, I can see colors. It's just certain shades blend together for me,
Yeah,
greens and browns and reds and stuff.
right.
And I think that's actually one of the reasons that I was drawn to comics in a way, because the old school comics, when I started, the four color, bright primary colors are much easier for me to see. And that's what I'm drawn to is
Yeah.
these colors, and so like, as you mentioned, we have different moods. There's different color schemes in different sections of the books. At the beginning, the colors really, really pop out. I just love seeing the Uncle Sam's costume in the bright colors. Like,
Mm.
yeah, that's
Yeah, it's bright, and that's what's interesting is like with computer color, it does. I keep seeing this graying out, or they're getting, just millions more colors, or there's just, I think with this, there was definitely an attempt, again, back to the storytelling as well, to get a golden age feel, but updated, and I think, Mignola is obviously an influence, and Bruce Timm is an influence. I think people will be able to see in this kind of stuff, because that's maybe the closest we know of these genres that are being blended here. At the same time, I think, we did our own homework. We did our own care. I mean, there's a Mignola-like villain in the story, which was a lot of fun to do, which we'll see a little bit. I'm not going to ruin it again or get into stuff, which that was sort of fun. We had little collaborative things like that, where I think he was created for the story, right? He wasn't really fully.
That's right. He's a character where I didn't have the character designed or really fleshed out. I knew we needed a character that filled that role. But
And I would say he became a Mignola, and from he's a Mignola parody kind of
yeah,
character, but at the same time, funny. I thought we needed a little bit, let's say there wasn't humor already, but humorous villain.
yeah.
you know.
So I mean, that was, yeah. So there's an interesting part of the collaborative process that, if my memory is, I knew we needed a character in that role, and there was, even though I didn't have that character created, I had sort of a group created, the Knights in Yellow. So I had a distinct idea for that, but I didn't know who was going to lead it. But I knew I wanted those characters in there because the Knights in Yellow are going to be appearing in the Crime Busters #5, which takes place in the mid 50s, 10 years later.
And you let me design those. You already had them on, but you kind of let me design. See, that's the kind of stuff where that's the collaboration, where it's not strictly Marvel method, where it's definitely, you've got your, it's more of your, that's why it's like, we maybe eventually put credits on stuff that match more like a movie credit, where, an art direction kind of situation, and it's because it also because you're the author. There's no two ways about that. You know what I mean? And the Marvel method gives this impression that the artist is also the author, which is like, it depends on the situation and where it is and that kind of stuff. And I've had situations like that. So yeah, so when we say Mark, that's why I think it's really good to have this conversation. I'm hoping it's not too long-winded. Some people get it. It's not the real Marvel.
It's true. I was just, most people these days, they work full script, where I would be writing out, a description of every panel and all the dialogue in advance. And
well, no, this is where I hope they would encourage writers. Like, two things I hope happen from this conversation we were just talking about is, if it does encourage writers to go like, oh, I can trust the artist. The artist isn't going to go in and jackknife and take my story and to take it off a cliff or anything. They're there to, if they show it in their work and the way they do so. So hire me. If you do this stuff, they're going to take your script and come into it as if they're a cinematographer or a director and visualize it. And also, when it comes to character design, feel secure that it'll be part of the job, that's going to be part of, which the big companies don't. You got to. That's why a lot of people create new characters. But it's like, if you've already got everything there, I'm with you, and I'm all around that. And also, that's the thing too, is like, it will work better, I think, depending. I don't know. It depends on the artist. I know there's fewer artists now that don't really care about the story. They just care about what they're going to draw. So, but my hope is, please work with an artist that gets how hard the writer works and wants to just visualize things.
So let me just ask, in the future, I know we talked about some of this before, before the recording, but what kind of projects do you have going? I know you have a few different projects, and I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about those if you want to now.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of been brimming for years that we're finally getting together, and it was a lot of it. I won't get into all. Let's just say there's been many obstacles, but finally got a team together to put together a project called Heroes for Heroes. And Heroes for Heroes are action figures created by Dr. Migo, who basically kept the Migo name alive for quite a few years and has been a friend of mine and supplier and creator of characters with me in action figures. And we're offering up 4 characters and working with Christopher Watts, who is helping me out on in a publishing role, as well as helping manage this project. We're basically going to offer these public domain action figures for the profits are going to go to the Heroes Initiative. So we thought it'd be this interesting cycle where characters from the public domain literally turn into these interesting conversation pieces, collectibles, but then basically the profits are going to go back and help the very people that created these public domain characters and people that worked in this industry and kind of did it never knowing how it turned into what it would turn into and need assistance. And our advisory board, our advisory chairman, let's call it, because I was hoping to have a board eventually, was Brian Augustin, who was graciously, who's a friend of mine and collaborator. And we worked on the Captain Midnight book together years ago. And so he's kind of keeping, I brought him to kind of keep an eye on things and just to also sort of be a liaison. And, he's, been a beneficiary of the Heroes Initiative and a lover of these characters. And we have all sorts of stuff we want to work on now. And as full disclosure, it'll be on a site with these figures, but we'll also have lots of different books, which we'll have as publishing ventures that are associated with these different characters and stuff like that. So, but the Heroes for Heroes are specifically, profits are going to be going to the Heroes Initiative. So that's the big thing we're launching there. And I've been, we've been working on another book called Cover Stories with Michael Norwitz, another writer, where we've had a similar sort of Marvel method collaboration where he'll send me script and some basic ideas, and I will kind of redraw the story. And we're working on, all these characters are public domain characters that have only appeared on a cover.
Oh yeah, cool.
And I had come up with a bunch of storylines around Captain KO. Michael saw that years ago, was inspired to use the character and then use other characters, and then got in touch with me years ago to work on this book. So it looks like it's going to be 60 pages. It's kind of centering on a character called the Weekender, which is sort of like Our Man, except he's got superpowers for 2 days rather than for 24 hours. But it's a lot of fun. I've always wanted to draw Our Man, so in a way I'm drawing Our Man in a funny way. And I also think he has a lot of potential. I just love the idea of it. It could be a great Netflix series. It's like you can see it in a different way. The guy, sort of a Walter Mitty kind of guy. He's a normal guy, but for 2 days he's a superhero. Or True Lies. Remember that great story, or it was made from a French movie or whatever. But but a guy who's like a secret agent, but appears to have a normal life. Anyway, so we've got all that stuff kind of brewing, and I've been working in gaming for a while now. So I've been taking on any if anybody's got any commissions they've got where they want me to come up with characters, anything around gaming. I'm doing a lot of covers right now for gaming books. So doing one
Cool.
right now based on kind of Warhammer, which I never like. So I easily adapt. I've been adapting to a lot of different stuff, and luckily, with the Warhammer one, I've been using kind of almost a style that we did Uncle Sam in, where it's that kind of
Cool.
roots kind of style, but it's very much the motifs and armor and aliens and all that kind of stuff of Warhammer. So yeah, thank you for letting me overplug.
Oh, sure. Yeah, my pleasure. All right. Well, thanks very much for joining me. And Uncle Sam versus Cthulhu, or Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam, which is technically the title. I switched it around. I wanted Cthulhu to be first billing for all the Cthulhu fans out there. But
Hey,
yeah.
who knows, right? Or if you put it through a marketing, put it through some, test audience or something.
So live on Kickstarter now. And thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks very much for watching. Again, I'll have the links down below if you want to check out Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam. Currently live on Kickstarter. There's a whole bunch of variant covers. All of the interior courses by Jay Piscopo. We also have the regular cover by Jay. There are a bunch of variant covers, some of them drawn by myself. We also have some by Ryan Mendoza, who's the regular artist on Miskatonic High, a really popular Kickstarter comic book series. So hopefully you'll check those out. And next time around, in a week or so, I'm going to be bringing you an interview with Ryan Mendoza about his variant covers for Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam, but we're also going to be talking a lot about Miskatonic High. So if you're a fan of Ryan, if you're a fan of Miskatonic High, if you're a fan of Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam, or if you just want to learn more about the comic book creative process, please join us in a week, and I'll have that video for you, and I'm really excited to present that to you, just as I was excited to present this. So again, I got the links down below, Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam, currently live, and thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for all your support.